The massive alien craft hurtled through Earth's atmosphere like a wounded beast, its exterior burning and fracturing under the pressure of the entry. It slammed into the ground, creating a massive crater that sent shock waves through the nearby fields and forests. Sergeant Gail watched from the ridge above, binoculars pressed to his face as the dust billowed into the sky. This was not what anyone had expected. Weeks earlier, the world had been on high alert as strange objects were detected in orbit. Theories ran wild from rogue asteroids to top-secret government experiments, but nothing could have prepared humanity for the sight of an actual extraterrestrial ship crash landing on their planet. The ship itself was enormous, a saucer-shaped monolith that had been designed no doubt for intimidation and grandeur, but now it sat broken and dented, a sad trophy of its own arrogance. The military had mobilized, swiftly surrounding the crash site with armored vehicles and heavily armed troops. But as the miry smoke began to clear and the battered remains of the ship became visible, the tension among the soldiers shifted from fear to something closer to amusement. Through the comms, Sergeant Gale's voice barked with a mixture of disbelief and humor. "You call that a landing? My grandmother could do better, and she's just a pile of rocks." The men chuckled nervously, weapons at the ready as they awaited the next move. From the shattered hull, a low groaning sound echoed, followed by the creaking and screeching of metal. A hatch at the base of the craft slowly peeled open, a makeshift ramp crashing into the dirt with a heavy thud. Shadowy figures began to emerge, tall, gangly shapes moving with a mechanical awkwardness that immediately struck the soldiers as odd. It quickly became clear why the aliens were wearing exoskeletons, towering mechanical stilts that augmented their height, but did little to hide the fact that they were struggling immensely to stay upright. Earth's gravity, it seemed, was not something they had properly accounted for. The invaders wobbled and swayed, their suits groaning under the strain as they attempted to march forward with something resembling dignity. Sergeant Gale shook his head. "Looks like gravity had other plans for them," he muttered, signaling his squad to advance with caution, but not with any real urgency. The lead alien, a bulbous-headed creature encased in a shimmering metallic suit, raised what appeared to be a weapon, a sleek rod that glowed ominously at its tip. The humans tensed for a moment, but the threat was quickly neutralized as the alien stumbled, losing its grip and sending the weapon clattering harmlessly to the ground. The alien collapsed moments later, the force of Earth's pull simply too much for its frail body to combat. "Welcome to Earth," Gail called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did you enjoy your fall?" The lead alien responded in a warbled mechanical growl translated through a buzzing device strapped to its neck. "We demand your immediate surrender," it stammered, struggling to prop itself up on its mechanical legs. "Right," Gail replied with a smirk. "Let's see how that goes for you." His men broke into laughter, unable to hide their amusement at the pitiful state of their would-be conquerors. The aliens made a few more clumsy attempts to assert dominance, but Earth's gravity was an unrelenting enemy. Their exosuits whined and buckled the metal joints, groaning in protest as one by one they toppled to the ground. Private Harris standing beside. Gail shook his head, chuckling softly. "They're barely holding it together, sir. Gravity's kicking their butts. That's what you get for skipping leg day." Another soldier quipped, drawing another round of chuckles. The scene was almost surreal. These were not the terrifying invaders that had filled humanity's nightmares. These were desperate, flailing figures, hopelessly outmatched by the very ground they stood on. The lead alien struggled to lift its head, glaring at the humans with as much menace as it could. "Muster, you humans cheat," it croaked. "Your planet is cursed," Gail laughed, crouching beside the alien. "Not cursed, pal, just a bit more intense than you expected. You really should have done your homework before dropping by uninvited." The alien leader gritted its mandibles, glaring but offering no rebuttal. Instead, it attempted once more to stand its suit motors, whining with effort as it wobbled precariously. Gail and his men watched with a mixture of curiosity and pity. There was a stubbornness to the creatures, a refusal to simply give up even in the face of overwhelming failure. It was almost admirable in a tragic sort of way. As the aliens regrouped, sitting in a defeated line on the ground, Gail contemplated their next move. Despite the humiliating defeat, there was a spark of defiance still burning in their strange alien eyes. They were down but not out. Sergeant Gail crossed his arms, observing the broken invaders as they plotted their next move. He could feel it. These beings were not ready to surrender entirely, not yet. Even though their grand plan of invasion had literally fallen flat, they were already thinking of ways to adapt, ways to overcome the brutal challenges that Earth threw at them. Gail knew better than to underestimate an enemy that could learn from its mistakes. No matter how funny they looked now, they might pose a real threat if given the chance. The scouts reported back quickly, confirming that while the alien ship was badly damaged, it was not completely destroyed. It sat, embedded in the Earth like a broken spear, engines fried, and systems offline for the foreseeable future. They were stranded, vulnerable, and exposed, yet somehow still defiant. Gail considered his options carefully. As much as he wanted to laugh off the situation, he knew it was dangerous to let his guard down. These aliens had crossed the stars with the intent to conquer. They would not give up that goal easily. No, he thought, if they wanted to stay, they would need to earn it, and Earth would be the ultimate test. They would have to fight for every inch, adapt to every hardship, endure every pressure, and it would start with a simple challenge, a climb up the nearby hills. If they could not even handle that, then there would be no need for further negotiation, no need for fear or diplomacy. If they failed, they would be harmless. If they succeeded, well, then things might get interesting either way. Earth had already taught them one harsh lesson. Gravity was not just a force to be measured. It was a relentless adversary, one that took no pity on the weak and no mercy on the arrogant. The aliens stumbled forward, their mechanical stilts groaning under the punishing pull of Earth's gravity. Every movement seemed a battle, every step a desperate attempt to stay upright. The humans stood in a loose semicircle around them, weapons ready, but their faces betraying more amusement than fear. These were supposed to be invaders, yet they could barely keep from collapsing under their own weight. Sergeant Gail watched closely, his sharp eyes catching every twitch and falter. It was almost painful to witness these creatures who had traveled across the stars, outfitted with technology beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Now reduced to awkward, flailing figures, trying in vain to adjust to a planet that did not welcome them. The lead alien raised its head, the buzzing translator strapped to its neck crackling to life. "We demand your immediate surrender." It repeated the words, trembling with strain as it tried. To project authority, Gail tilted his head, pretending to consider the offer, then shrugged nonchalantly. "Right," he said dryly. "Good luck with that." The soldiers around him chuckled openly now. The tension of the initial encounter completely evaporated. The aliens tried to move forward again, but the result was even worse than before. One of them stumbled the mechanical suit, groaning as it failed to compensate and crashed heavily onto the dirt. A second one attempted to assist, only to be dragged down as, well, the two collapsing into a tangled heap of limbs and machinery. Another alien attempted to raise a weapon, a sleek metal rod that pulsed with a faint inner light. It would have been intimidating had it not wobbled so precariously in the alien's trembling grasp. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ground, a burst of light scorching a patch of grass. Sergeant Gail barked a short order, and his men took cover more out of habit than necessity. The aliens were clearly no real threat, not in their current state. Private Harris chuckled under his breath. "These guys came all this way just to get their butts kicked by gravity," he muttered. Gail grinned but kept his focus on the lead alien, who was struggling valiantly to regain its footing. The determination was there, but so was the undeniable reality of Earth's harsh environment. "Welcome to Earth," Gail called out, again his tone mockingly cheerful. "Hope you packed a lunch. It is going to be a long day." The aliens regrouped, forming a shaky line there. Metal suits whining with every tortured movement, they attempted to project unity, but the sight was laughable. Their mechanical legs trembled visibly, and for every step they managed, another alien stumbled and nearly fell. Harris leaned toward Gail, whispering, barely containing his laughter. "Sir, I think a stiff breeze would take them out." Gail smirked. "Maybe, but let's not get cocky. Even the most desperate enemies can be dangerous if cornered." They watched as the lead alien attempted to rally its troops, barking orders in its guttural clicking language. The translator device tried and failed to keep up, spitting out fragmented phrases about strategy, regrouping, and counterattack. Gail shook his head, amazed at their stubbornness. These guys really had no idea what they had walked into. Earth's gravity was just the beginning. The terrain, the weather, the unpredictable wildlife, even the bacteria could pose threats. These aliens could not have anticipated. It was not just the strength needed to move or fight. It was the endurance, the constant struggle against an environment that seemed designed to break them. Gail approached the lead alien, who had finally managed to stand upright, though it swayed precariously on its stilts. Up close, the creature looked less menacing than tragic, its large, bulbous eyes filled with a mixture of frustration, fear, and raw determination. Gail planted the butt of his rifle into the dirt, casually resting his hands on the barrel. "Look," he said conversationally, "I get it. You thought this place was going to be easy pickings. Resources galore, a bunch of primitive bipeds barely worth worrying about. But you were wrong. This planet fights back, and it fights dirty." The alien glared at him, mandibles clicking in what might have been anger or maybe desperation. "We will adapt it," rasped Gail, raised an eyebrow. "Will you?" Now that I gotta see around them, the other aliens attempted to steady themselves, but the effort was clearly draining. Each movement was slow, deliberate, and agonizing. Every step looked like a small victory, and every stumble a crushing defeat. Yet none of them gave up. They wobbled, they fell. They got back up again, driven by something deeper than mere pride. Perhaps survival instinct, perhaps the crushing shame of failure. Harris approached cautiously, his weapon lowered but his guard still up. "Sir, what do we do with them?" Gail considered the question carefully. Watching the alien struggle stirred something unexpected in him. A mixture of amusement, respect, and a healthy dose of caution. They might have been laughable now, but they were learning, and learning was dangerous. "We watch," he said firmly. "We let them try to adapt. It will tell us everything we need to know." Harris nodded, understanding the unspoken strategy. Let them tire themselves out. Let them reveal their limits. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on the battered field, the aliens continued their pitiful attempts at movement. It was both comical and sobering to see beings who had mastered interstellar travel rendered helpless by something as simple as gravitational force. One alien collapsed onto its knees, mechanical legs buckling with a sharp metallic groan. Two others rushed to help it up, showing a surprising camaraderie that did not go unnoticed by the humans. Private Kent scratched his chin thoughtfully. "You think they'll give up, sir?" he asked. Gail shook his head slowly. "No, I don't. They're too stubborn for that. But it doesn't matter. Even if they refuse to quit, Earth will grind them down. Eventually, if not gravity, then terrain. If not terrain, then something else. This place doesn't pull its punches." A few of the aliens managed to stand longer, balancing shakily on their stilts, but any attempt to walk more than a few steps ended in disaster. Their suits were clearly not designed for sustained heavy gravity use. Every movement strained motors, joints, and hydraulics to the breaking point. "You gotta admire the guts, though," Harris muttered. "They know they are outmatched, but they keep trying." Gail grunted, "Maybe, but guts won't save them here. Adaptation takes more than willpower. It takes understanding and preparation." They had neither as the hours dragged on and the aliens slowly began to organize themselves better, coordinating their movements, using each other for support instead of trying to stand alone. They formed crude formations, linking arms or bracing one another. Their movements were still clumsy, but there was a hint of improvement, a faint glimmer that maybe, just maybe they were starting to figure it out. Gail watched with a mixture of dread and fascination, because adaptation meant danger. Adaptation meant resilience, and resilience could eventually mean threat. For now, though, they were still little more than clumsy invaders, humbled by a planet that refused to play by their rules. The field was littered with the signs of their failure. Broken machinery, scorched earth, battered and bruised, alien bodies struggling to rise again. The scene was almost biblical in its cruelty, proud, brought low by forces they could not control. Gail turned to his squad, issuing new orders quietly. "Stay alert, stay sharp. No jokes, no assumptions. Watch and learn. If these guys manage to find their footing, We need to be ready." Private Harris and the others nodded, their expressions sobering quickly. The laughter was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. They might have been funny, but they were still an enemy, and enemies were dangerous, especially when desperate. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the field. The aliens continued to struggle, rising, falling, rising again, each time slower but a little more coordinated. Gail narrowed his eyes, noting every detail, every improvement, however slight. They were battered, but they were not beaten. Not yet. Sergeant Gail stood with his arms crossed, watching as the defeated aliens sat in a sullen line across the grassy field, their mechanical suits battered and whining quietly with every minor movement. The afternoon sun beat down on the scene, casting harsh light over the crater, the broken ship, and the broken spirits of the would-be invaders. The humans kept a cautious distance, weapons at the ready, but the mood among the soldiers had shifted from mockery to something closer to curiosity. Gail narrowed his eyes, studying the lead alien, who sat propped up awkwardly against its own metal appendages. The creature was breathing heavily, each rasp of its lungs a struggle against the planet it had so woefully underestimated. The translator at its neck buzzed to life as it lifted its head. "You humans cheat," it croaked. "Your planet is cursed." Gail could not help the chuckle that escaped him. He walked forward, squatting down so that he was eye level with the alien. "Not cursed, pal, just a little tougher than you expected," he said, tapping the metal leg of the exosuit with the barrel of his rifle. "You really should have done your homework before dropping in uninvited." The alien said nothing, glaring at him with bulbous, glassy eyes full of frustration and something else, maybe a glimmer of realization. Behind it, the other aliens shifted uneasily, trying and failing to adjust their battered suits to a more comfortable position. Gail stood up, dusting his hands off. "All right, you lot," he called out to his squad. "Looks like they're having a rough day, but let's not assume they are harmless just because they look pathetic." Private Harris stepped up beside him, chuckling softly. "They look like toddlers trying to walk, sir," he said, barely able to contain his amusement. Gail nodded, but his expression remained serious. "Gravity is doing half our job for us, but do not get lazy." Harris gave a quick salute. "Understood, sir." They formed a perimeter around the aliens, careful not to provoke, but ready to react to anything stupid. The captured invaders sat quietly, their earlier bravado completely drained by the merciless pull of Earth's gravity. Occasionally, one would attempt to shift position, only to slump back to the ground in defeat. Their weapons, if they could be called that, lay discarded and useless, scattered across the dirt. Sergeant Gail paced back and forth in front of them, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. "You know," he said conversationally, "it is not just gravity you have to worry about here. It is the weather, the terrain, the wildlife, heck, even the bacteria will give you a run for your money. Earth is not a forgiving place, and you brought stilts to a tank fight." The lead alien did not respond. Right away, clearly struggling just to remain upright. Finally, it hissed through the translator. "We underestimated." Gail gave a small smile. "No kidding." The soldiers around him relaxed slightly, but kept their eyes on the aliens, trusting Gail's instincts. The mood had shifted again, less mocking, now more measured. They knew better than to underestimate an enemy, even a defeated one, especially one stubborn enough to keep fighting when everything had gone wrong. Private Kent leaned over to Harris, whispering, "So what do you think they are going to do now?" Harris shrugged quietly. "Adapt maybe, or die." Either way, he was not too worried yet. Gail, however, was not so sure. These creatures had survived a crash landing, navigated alien gravity, and even now refused to completely give up. That kind of resilience could not be ignored. He watched as the lead alien struggled to its feet, the motors of its suit whining under the strain. It wobbled but remained upright, glaring defiantly at the humans. "We have not surrendered," it hissed defiantly. Behind it, the other aliens murmured low sounds of agreement, a small ripple of resolve passing through their ranks. Gail raised an eyebrow, unimpressed and yet quietly curious. "All right, tough guy," he said dryly. "What is next? Another clumsy charge, another failed attempt at domination." The alien leader pointed a shaky, spindly finger toward the nearby hills test terrain. "We will adapt." Gail smirked, folding his arms. "You sure about that? Those hills are a challenge even for us, and we grew up." "Here we will prevail," the alien insisted, though it visibly swayed on its mechanical legs, as if the weight of its own pride might pull it back down again. Gail shrugged. "Suit yourselves, but we will be right behind you in case you need a hand or a stretcher." He turned and motioned for his men to prepare to move. The aliens formed a loose line, their movements jerky and uncoordinated as they began to limp and stumble toward the hills. The soldiers followed at a respectful distance, amused but alert, watching to see just how far these stubborn invaders could push themselves. Private Harris muttered under his breath. "Placing bets with the others, I give them 10 minutes tops before they faceplant again." The ground was uneven, the incline gentle at first but growing steeper with every step. The humans navigated it easily, their boots finding purchase on familiar terrain, but the aliens struggled mightily. Their exosuits screeched and whined under the extra demands of the slope legs, shaking violently with every strained movement. Yet to the humans' surprise, they pressed on. Their leader stumbled several times, nearly collapsing, but managed each time to regain its footing by sheer force of will. Gail watched with a strange mixture of amusement and respect. They were not moving fast, but they were moving. Their pride was a powerful engine driving them upward, even when their bodies were screaming in protest. About halfway up, one of the aliens tripped hard, falling onto its knees with a loud metallic thunk. The entire line wobbled, several of them almost toppling as the formation faltered. Gail half expected them to give up then, but two others moved awkwardly to help their fallen comrade, dragging it back to its feet. The three of them wobbled together but pressed on. "Maybe they are tougher than they look," Private Kent muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Gail grunted maybe, or maybe they are just desperate. Either way, he was not laughing anymore. Not really, as the climb dragged on the aliens slow. Agonizing progress became harder to mock. Even the soldiers grew quieter, watching with grudging respect as the invaders fought their way up the unforgiving hillside. The lead alien paused halfway up, gasping for breath, its entire frame trembling from the effort. It turned its large eyes back toward Gail, locking gazes across the distance. "You think us foolish," it rasped through its translator, "but we learn, adapt, evolve." Gail met its gaze steadily, his arms folded against his chest. "Learn all you want," he said, "but Earth does not play fair. You are up against more than just us. You are up against everything this planet throws at you." The alien nodded slightly or tried to its movements, sluggish and robotic. Yet it resumed climbing, one foot after the other, grinding slowly up the slope. Behind it, the others followed, less steady, but still moving. Their exosuits groaned under the strain, yet they refused to stop, refused to fall. The soldiers watched in silence. The mocking smiles gone, replaced by something. Heavier admiration maybe, or simple human recognition of stubborn spirit. 10 minutes passed, then 15, then 20. Harris lost his bet and said nothing, watching with the others as the aliens continued their painful ascent. At last, the lead alien reached a flat plateau, collapsing onto its hands and knees, gasping for air. It raised its head slowly, its voice barely a whisper. "We can endure," Sergeant Gail approached slowly, crouching nearby, arms resting on his knees. "You made it this far," he said, "but let me ask you something. Even if you adapt, what makes you think you can take over a whole planet like this?" The alien did not respond immediately, taking several ragged breaths before finally rasping, "Not take over, survive, coexist. Learn your strength and find ours." Gail blinked, surprised. He had expected bravado or another empty threat, but not that, not a plea, not humility. He exchanged a glance with Harris, who looked equally shocked. "Coexist, huh?" Gail said quietly, skeptical but thoughtful, maybe, just maybe. There was more to this encounter than anyone had realized. Sergeant Gail stood back, arms crossed, as he watched the battered aliens gather themselves, preparing for the next challenge ahead. The humans had thought the show was over after the humiliating crash landing and the pitiful attempts to walk. But it seemed the aliens had no intention of quitting. The hills that loomed ahead were steep, rugged, and covered in thick patches of rock and undergrowth. the kind of terrain that could exhaust even seasoned soldiers, but the alien leader pointed toward them with a trembling arm, declaring that they would adapt. Gail had raised an eyebrow at the time, skeptical, but now he was curious to see just how serious these invaders were about proving themselves. The aliens lined up their exosuits, whining and clicking as they recalibrated for the uphill journey. Gail signaled to his squad to stay alert but keep their distance. They were not there to interfere, not yet. The plan was simple: observe and learn. Ekinenor. The aliens truly wanted to coexist, as they now claimed they would have to earn it step by painful step. The ascent began slowly, the first incline deceptively gentle. The humans followed a few paces behind, navigating the terrain with ease. Their boots found familiar purchase on the rocky soil, but the aliens struggled mightily. Their mechanical legs creaked with every movement, the added angle of the slope throwing off whatever balance they had managed to regain. Harris watched them with an amused shake of his head, whispering to Gail, "Sir, place your bets. How long before they tumble again?" Gail smirked, not bothering to answer. The first stumble came sooner than expected. One of the aliens lost its footing, slipping backward and crashing onto its side with a metallic clatter. The others paused, uncertain whether to help or continue. The leader barked something unintelligible through its translator, and two aliens awkwardly moved to assist, dragging their fallen comrade upright. Before pressing on, the hill grew steeper, every step more grueling than the last. The aliens moved like broken puppets, their mechanical legs shuddering violently under the strain. Gail had to admit it was a strange sight and a stranger feeling. Somewhere between respect and grim amusement, he watched as beings who had crossed galaxies were brought low by simple gravity and dirt. They stumbled, they fell, but they kept going, driven by something that even Gail found hard not to respect. Pride, maybe desperation, maybe sheer, stubborn survival instinct. Whatever it was, it kept them moving forward inch by painful inch. The humans followed quietly, their weapons still ready, but their attitudes more contemplative now. Private Kent wiped sweat from his brow, muttering, "I don't know how they're doing it, sir. I would have quit after that crash." Sergeant Gail nodded quietly, not taking his eyes off the aliens. Pride can drive a being a lot farther than fear. Sometimes, he said, gravity was still the main adversary, and it showed every few feet. Another alien would collapse, their exosuits shrieking in protest as motors overheated and joints buckled. Some stayed down for long minutes, gasping for breath, before mustering the strength to rise again and rejoin the struggling line. The humans said little now, watching with a kind of morbid fascination at the spectacle before them. They were witnessing something rare, the complete humbling of a proud race, yet also the raw birth of potential resilience. The lead alien moved stubbornly at the front, planting one foot slowly in front of the other. Every step seemed an act of defiance, not just against gravity, but against failure itself. As they neared a particularly steep outcropping, the line faltered. The ground was uneven, loose rocks slipping underfoot. The aliens hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. Gail leaned over to Harris, murmuring quietly, "Watch closely. This is the real test. Will they adapt or will they break?" The lead alien crouched awkwardly, adjusting the angle of its exosuit limbs, recalibrating for balance. It hesitated, then lunged forward, grabbing at the rocks with clawed hands for support. It was not graceful, and it was certainly not dignified, but it worked one by one. The others mimicked the movement, scrambling up the rocks in ungainly but effective fashion. Sergeant Gail found himself nodding slightly. Impressed, Private Harris whistled low under his breath. "Well, I'll be damned, sir. They are learning." He did not sound amused anymore, more a kind of reluctant admiration. The aliens crested the rocky outcropping, panting heavily, their bodies trembling from the exertion, but they did not collapse, not this time. They paused briefly, gathering their strength before continuing upward, ever upward. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the hillside. The temperature dropped slightly, but the air remained thick with effort and exhaustion. Gail kept his squad moving parallel to the aliens, never interfering. Only observing, Harris muttered, "Sir, at this rate they might actually make it to the top," Gail grunted. Maybe, but the top is just the beginning. This planet has 1,000 ways to crush arrogance, and they have only tasted a few. The climb grew more brutal near the summit, steeper, harsher, and littered with debris. The aliens slowed to a crawl, their movements jerky and uneven, yet still they pressed on one shaky step at a time. One alien stumbled badly, falling to its hands and knees, its suit sparking where it scraped against jagged stone. It tried to rise, failed, then tried again. Finally, two others dropped to help it, lifting it bodily between them and dragging it forward. Sergeant Gail watched silently, a strange tightness forming in his chest. This was not the behavior of arrogant conquerors, not anymore. This was survival, raw and desperate and painfully familiar. Finally, after what felt like hours, the lead alien dragged itself over the last ridge, collapsing face down on the dusty plateau. Its companions followed, collapsing one by one, gasping for air, their suits venting steam and straining against the accumulated damage. Sergeant Gail approached slowly, his boots crunching on the dry ground. The lead alien lifted its head, its bulbous eyes meeting his gaze with a flicker of exhausted triumph. "We endure it," rasped through the translator. We learned Gail crouched nearby, studying the creature. There was no mockery in his expression now, only a guarded kind of respect. "You made it up here," he said slowly. "Not bad for a bunch of rookies, but the hills are only the beginning. You have a whole planet left to face." The alien did not flinch, did not argue. It simply nodded, a slow, weary motion, full of grim understanding. Gail stood glancing around at the scattered, broken figures of the alien squad. Battered, bruised, but not beaten. They had been humbled, but they had not surrendered. That stubborn flicker of determination burned within them still, and somehow Gail found that he could not dismiss it so easily. Private Harris approached cautiously. "Sir, what now?" he asked. Gail considered the question carefully. "We see how far they're willing to go," he said at last. "We see if they really mean what they say about learning, adapting, coexisting. Because surviving a hill is one thing. Surviving Earth is another entirely." He looked down at the lead alien again, his voice hard but not cruel. "If you want to live here, you better be ready to fight for it every single day." The alien nodded once more, its body trembling from exhaustion, but its spirit somehow. Unbroken, Sergeant Gail straightened up, signaling his squad to stand down but stay alert. The day was ending, but the test was far from over. The real challenge had only just begun. As the aliens rested on the plateau, exhausted and battered, Sergeant Gail and his squad stood a few meters away. Their expressions a mix of curiosity, caution, and something that none of them wanted to admit: respect. The aliens had proven that they were willing to endure hardships beyond anything they had anticipated. They had been humbled by Earth's gravity, had stumbled and crawled their way up a punishing hill, but they had not broken. Not yet. Gail paced slowly back and forth, boots crunching on the dry dirt, thinking carefully about what the next move should be. The aliens had claimed they wanted to coexist, but words were easy. Actions were what mattered. Harris approached, holding a small tablet with scouting reports. "Sir, the scouts checked the crash site again," he said quietly. "Their ship is still there, pretty banged up, but it is not going anywhere. Engines are fried, hull is cracked wide open. They are grounded for the foreseeable future." Gail nodded. "Good work." He looked back at the aliens, who now sat slumped against rocks and dirt, breathing heavily, but watching him with weary alertness. They had not tried to flee, nor had they made any sudden moves of aggression. If anything, they looked like a group of exhausted soldiers waiting for orders. Gail rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If they really wanted to coexist, they would have to prove it. He turned to his squad, gathering them around in a loose circle. "Listen up," he said, voice low and firm. "I do not buy their peaceful intentions just because they managed to survive a climb. They might still be playing a long game, testing us, seeing what we are made of. So we test them right back." Harris frowned slightly, how Sir Gail pointed down the slope to a dense forest that stretched out like a green ocean beyond the base of the hill. The terrain there was even harsher, thick. Underbrush, uneven ground, slippery rocks, and a river cutting through it at the far end. He turned back to the squad. If they want to coexist, they need to survive Earth properly. Not just hills, not just gravity, the whole brutal package. The squad nodded understanding. The plan was simple but effective. Let the planet itself be the test. Gail walked back to the lead alien, who struggled to lift its heavy head and meet his gaze. "All right," he said, crouching down again. "You said you want to learn. Adapt, coexist. Fine, here is your next challenge. You make it down this hill, through that forest, cross the river, and reach the clearing on the other side. No shortcuts, no help from us. If you can do that, then maybe we talk about something other than your crash landing." The alien leader stared at him, breathing hard, then nodded slowly. "We accept it," rasped its translator, buzzing faintly. The other aliens stirred, blinking slowly, but showing no signs of protest. Gail stood and backed away, giving them space. Harris muttered quietly under his breath, "Sir, you think they can actually pull it off?" Gail shrugged. Maybe not. But we're going to find out." The aliens lined up at the edge of the plateau. The forest and river spread out before them like a gauntlet. Their suits whirred softly as they adjusted once more for the new terrain, and slowly, awkwardly, they began their descent. The slope was even more treacherous on this side, loose gravel and slick mud patches waiting to trip the unwary. The humans followed at a safe distance, observing carefully. The first alien made it about 10 steps before slipping, its mechanical legs flailing wildly as it tumbled down the slope. Sparks flew from its suit as it slid, scraping along the rocks. The others paused, uncertain, but the leader barked a harsh command, and they resumed moving, inching downward, carefully determined. Gail watched as the fallen alien struggled back to its feet, battered but not broken. It shook off the dirt and staggered forward, joining its companions. Private Kent shook his head in disbelief. "They are stubborn as hell, sir," he muttered. Gail nodded, eyes narrowing. "They have to be stubborn if they want to survive." The descent was slow, painful, and full of minor disasters. Every few minutes, another alien would slip or stumble, their suits groaning under the abuse. But each time they would recover, dragging themselves forward. The bottom of the slope was a muddy, uneven stretch littered with rocks and thick patches of tangled roots. The aliens moved through it with agonizing slowness. Their exosuits clearly not designed for this kind of punishment, Harris muttered. "Sir, even if they make it to the river, how are they supposed to cross it? Those suits look heavy as hell." Gail shrugged again. "That is their problem. They want to live here. They figure it out themselves." They pressed onward, entering the thick forest. The underbrush grabbed at their legs. Vines twisted around their arms. Low branches slapped against their faces. They moved like wounded, animals slow and methodical, fighting the terrain every step of the way. The humans followed quietly, weapons lowered but ready. Their respect for the aliens was growing, but caution remained paramount. You could admire an enemy and still keep your guard up. Gail knew that better than anyone. The forest grew denser, darker, the light filtering down in scattered patches. The aliens stumbled frequently, tripping over hidden roots or slipping on wet leaves, but they never stopped, never turned back. Occasionally, they would help each other, one steadying another when a suit seized up or a leg buckled. Gail watched every interaction, every small moment of cooperation. They were not just surviving individually, they were surviving as a unit. The river came into view at last, sparkling in the slanting afternoon sunlight. Its current was swift, swollen from recent rains, and the far bank looked like a distant dream. Harris stopped at the tree line, watching intently. "I do not see how they are going to pull this off, sir," he said. Gail said nothing, simply folding his arms and waiting. The lead alien approached the river, cautiously stepping into the water, which quickly rose past its knees. Its exosuit shuddered and whined, motors straining against the current. It almost lost its footing, but somehow managed to stay upright, motioning for the others to follow. One by one, the aliens entered the river, leaning on each other for support. The current tugged at them, threatening to sweep them away, and more than once an alien stumbled, dropping to its knees only to be dragged upright by its companions. Inch by painful inch they crossed, struggling against the water and their own failing strength. Gail stood silently at the shore, watching with narrowed eyes. If they made it across, if they managed this, then maybe they were not just invaders anymore. Maybe they were something else, something worth a second chance. The first alien stumbled onto the far bank, collapsing onto the grass. The others followed, dropping in. Exhausted heaps, they lay there for a long moment, gasping, their bodies spent, their suits hissing and venting steam but alive. Harris let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned, sir. They did it." Gail nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, they did." He approached the riverbank, standing across from the lead alien, who struggled to lift its head and look at him. "We wish to coexist," the alien managed to say, voice barely a whisper. Gail looked at it for a long moment, then extended a hand across the river, bridged the gap for the first time. The alien hesitated, then reached out, grasping his hand with surprising strength. They gripped each other firmly, a silent understanding passing between them. Gail pulled the alien fully onto its feet, steadying it. "You made it this far," he said quietly, "but do not think for a second that it gets easier. Gravity is just the start. Every day will be a fight." The alien nodded once, understanding and accepting the truth. Gail released its hand, stepping back as the other aliens slowly rose, gathering behind their leader. Battered but not beaten, Sergeant Gail turned to his squad, nodding slightly. They were not invaders anymore. At least not today. Today they were survivors, and maybe tomorrow they would be something more. The aliens stood on the far side of the river, soaked, battered, and heaving for breath, but somehow still on their feet. Sergeant Gail watched them carefully, his arms crossed over his chest as he weighed their next move. They had crossed the river through sheer stubbornness, refusing to let the currents or their failing exosuits stop them. But the forest beyond was even denser, even more unforgiving. If they thought surviving a hill and a river was enough, they were wrong. Earth was relentless, and it did not care how determined you were. Gail paced along the riverbank, his boots crunching on the damp stones, thinking about the next challenge. These creatures had shown heart. There was no denying that, but heart alone would not cut it out here. They needed resilience, adaptability, the kind that only came from facing the worst and coming through it, not once, but over and over again. He called Harris over quietly. "We push them a little more," he said. "Keep the pressure on." Harris nodded, understanding immediately. "What do you have in mind?" Sir Gail pointed toward the thicket of forest ahead. The undergrowth was almost impenetrable. Thick vines, thorny bushes, and tangled roots everywhere. Beyond that, steep ridges, slick rocks, and sudden drops. The aliens would have to navigate it all to reach the far clearing. If they could do that, maybe they were serious about this coexistence thing. Otherwise, they would be lucky just to survive the attempt. Gail turned back to the lead alien, who was still catching its breath. "All right," he said, "you made it across the river. Good for you. But if you really want to survive here, you have to keep going." He pointed toward the dense forest ahead. "Through there," he said, "across the ridge and into the clearing beyond. No shortcuts, no help." Same rules. The alien leader straightened its battered frame, nodding slowly. "We will adapt it," rasped. The humans and aliens set off again, the squad following at a cautious distance. The first steps into the forest were brutal. The underbrush fought them every inch of the way, grabbing at their legs, tripping them, slashing at their exposed limbs. The alien suits sparked and groaned, the exoskeletons struggling to compensate for the constant shifting terrain. Gail watched closely, noting every misstep, every adjustment. The aliens were not moving fast, but they were learning, adapting their movements to the terrain, using each other for support when needed. Private Kent muttered low under his breath. "I almost feel bad for them." Sir Gail said nothing, his focus entirely on the struggling figures ahead. The aliens pressed forward, their movements slow and deliberate. They had learned from the river to move together to support the weak, and it was paying off. Every time one stumbled, two others reached out to steady it. Every time a vine snagged a leg, they worked together to free it without losing momentum. Gail had to admit it was impressive. Not graceful, not efficient, but stubborn. Effective movement, inching forward against a world that seemed determined to break them. The forest grew darker, thicker, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and crushed vegetation. The aliens pushed on, heads down, bodies leaning forward against the unseen weight of the planet itself. Harris whispered to Gail, "I didn't think they had this much fight in them, sir." Gail grunted quietly. "Earth will teach them real fast what it means to survive." The ridge loomed ahead, a jagged line of broken stone and steep climbs. The aliens approached it without hesitation, their leader pausing briefly to survey the slope before beginning the climb. The humans spread out around the base of the ridge, watching carefully. The climb was brutal. A few meters up, one alien slipped, falling hard against the rocks. Its suit screeched in protest. Joints locking up for a moment, two others immediately dropped beside it, lifting and pushing it forward together. Gail watched the teamwork, silently weighing what it meant. These were not the same arrogant beings who had fallen from the sky, expecting to dominate the planet. These were survivors, battered, humbled, but determined. The ridge grew steeper, sharper. One alien lost its grip, sliding back several feet, before jamming its metal limbs into the rock to halt its descent. It looked up, its large glassy eyes locking briefly with Gail's before it resumed climbing, wordlessly refusing to give up. Sergeant Gail nodded almost imperceptibly. He understood that look. He had seen it before in soldiers who refused to surrender to wounds or exhaustion or hopeless odds. The climb dragged on, every meter a battle. The alien suits vented steam joints, whining motors straining, yet they pressed forward. Their leader was the first to crest the top, dragging itself onto the plateau beyond. Collapsing onto the ground, the remaining others followed one by one, each arrival marked by heavy gasping breaths and trembling limbs. Gail climbed up after them, standing a few feet away, arms folded, watching as they struggled to recover. Private Harris came up beside him, shaking his head in disbelief. "They actually made it." Sir Gail said nothing for a moment, just watching. Then he finally spoke quietly. "They're tougher than I thought. Not smarter maybe, but tougher." The lead alien raised its head, locking eyes with Gail again. "We endure it, managed to say through the buzzing translator we learn." Gail crouched down, resting his elbows on his knees, surveying the battered group around him. "You want to survive here," he said quietly. "It is going to take more than just endurance. Every day will be worse than the last. Sometimes you will think you cannot go any farther, and then you will have to keep going anyway." The alien nodded slowly, its body trembling from exhaustion, but its spirit clearly unbroken. Harris shifted uneasily beside him. "Sir, what if they actually pull it off? What if they really do adapt?" Gail glanced at him, then back at the aliens. "Then we figure out what to do next," he said, "because anything that can survive this planet deserves a chance to stay." Harris nodded thoughtfully, understanding the weight behind those words. They were not just testing the aliens, they were testing themselves, testing the idea that maybe coexistence was possible if it was forged in enough struggle, enough shared hardship. Gail stood slowly, signaling for his squad to stay alert but stand down. He walked over to the lead alien, extending a hand for the second time. The alien hesitated for just a moment, then reached out, gripping his hand with surprising strength. Gail pulled it to its feet, steadying it as it swayed on unsteady legs. "Welcome to Earth," he said quietly. "You passed the first test, but remember, it never gets easier here." The alien nodded understanding, and for the first time since this strange encounter began, Gail allowed himself a small, guarded hope. Maybe they could find a way forward together, battered, bruised, and stubborn enough to survive whatever Earth threw at them next. The exhausted aliens stood at the edge of the plateau, their battered exosuits hissing softly in the cool evening air. Sergeant Gail watched them carefully, his arms crossed over his chest and his mind weighing everything that had unfolded so far. They had survived the brutal landing, endured the crushing pull of Earth's gravity, climbed steep hills, crossed raging rivers, and navigated through unforgiving forests, battered, bruised, and humbled. Yet they had refused to quit, refused to give in to despair or defeat. Harris stepped up beside him quietly. "Sir, what do you think happens now?" Gail looked over the field where the alien stood, too tired to posture, too beaten down to threaten, yet somehow still standing. He saw not invaders anymore, but survivors, beings who had come to this planet with arrogance, but had learned humility through pain and struggle. Maybe, Just maybe they could become something else. Gail turned to his squad, gathering them close. Listen up, he said, voice steady but low. They have proven something today. They can endure. They can adapt. That does not make them our friends, not yet, but it means they are not the same threat they were when they dropped out of the sky. It means they are capable of change, capable of learning, and that means we have a decision to make. Harris frowned slightly. What decision? Sir Gail looked back at the aliens who were watching him too with wary, tired eyes. The decision to treat them as enemies still, or to give them the chance to become something better, he said slowly. Because if there is one thing Earth teaches better than any planet, it is that survival changes you, and sometimes the enemy you fear most becomes the ally you need. Harris nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what Gail was saying. The squad relaxed slightly, not lowering their guard completely, but recognizing that the situation had shifted. Gail walked back over to the lead alien, who was propped up against a large rock, its limbs trembling from fatigue, but its eyes still sharp. We will endure, the alien said, its voice raspy through the battered translator. We will learn. Gail crouched down, looking it square in the eye. Maybe you will, he said. Maybe you will find a way to live here, to understand this world and what it demands. But you have to know something first. Earth does not forgive. Earth does not care how advanced you are or how proud. You were back home. Earth tests you every day, every storm, every winter, every drought, every mountain. Earth pushes and pushes until only the strong and the smart survive. You want to stay. You better be ready for that. The alien nodded slowly. We understand it, said, its voice faint but determined. Gail stood and extended a hand again. This time the gesture was not just about helping them to their feet. It was about something deeper, a recognition that survival had built a bridge where weapons had failed. The alien took his hand, gripping it firmly, and pulled itself upright. Together they turned to look out over the vast landscape stretching out before them. Hills, forests, rivers, all the unforgiving trials that Earth had to offer. Gail knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more tests, more hardships, more reasons to doubt. But today they had crossed a line together, not as enemies, but as fellow survivors. The lesson was not just for the aliens, it was for the humans too. Earth did not just test the body, it tested the spirit. It demanded resilience and adaptability, not just from those who came from the stars, but from those who called it home. The struggle of the aliens mirrored the struggle of humanity itself. Every generation facing new challenges, new environments, new hardships, learning to endure, adapting to survive, refusing to give up even when everything seemed lost. Gail thought of the wars humanity had fought, the disasters. They had survived the countless times they had been knocked down and forced to crawl forward, step by agonizing step. Earth had shaped them. And maybe it would shape these newcomers too. Not into conquerors, but into something stronger, wiser, better. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the battered plateau. Gail stood silently for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. Harris came up beside him quietly, watching the aliens who were slowly gathering themselves ready to move forward. What now, sir? He asked Gail, smiled faintly, a grim but genuine expression. Now we see what kind of neighbors they really want to be, he said, because surviving Earth is one thing, learning to live here, that is something else entirely. Together, the humans and the aliens turned their faces toward the darkening horizon. Ready or not, the real test was just beginning. The story of these aliens was not so different from the story of humanity itself. Both had faced unimaginable challenges. Both had been forced to confront their own weaknesses. Both had discovered that survival was not about strength alone, but about perseverance, cooperation, and the willingness to change. In the end, it was not the strongest who survived nor the smartest. It was those who adapted, those who refused to let failure define them, those who found a way forward when every force of nature seemed determined to crush them. Sergeant Gail knew this better than most, and as he looked at the battered, determined figures before him, he allowed himself one small, guarded hope. Maybe Earth had found a few more worthy survivors after all.